Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Navigating Global Regulatory Landscapes in an Evolving Biopharma Industry. Today, our experienced industry experts will provide a comprehensive overview of best practices and processes crucial for ensuring product quality and compliance. Those experts are Mike Brewer, Director, Global Principal Consultant, Regulatory and Bioproduction; Xiao Peng, Senior Staff Regulatory Affairs Specialist, Life Sciences Solutions Group; and Alexis Cockcroft, Director, Regulatory Consultant with Lex Regulatory Ltd. Now, just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have a question for our speakers or wish to share any thoughts of your own, please submit it through the Q&A box on your screen. If you run into any problems with the stream today, please try refreshing your browser first. If your problem persists, go ahead and use the Q&A tool to submit a question, and I'll help get you back on track. We do want to say that this event will be available on demand. Normally within about 24 hours, you'll just use the same link that you used today. Now, by the end of this session, our panelists hope to help you with the information as follows: master regulatory guidance and risk management, including cost efficiency, timing, and contingency planning. You'll gain insights into effective change management and tech transfer strategies to ensure quality and compliance, and you'll understand how evolving medicine regulations can impact regulatory strategies. Now, with all that said, let's bring on our panelists. Welcome to our panelists, and let's get started with our first question. Now, Xiao, I'm going to start with you. You shared with me earlier that the final guidance for Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Designation Program was issued by FDA this past December, just a few months back. Can you share some details and why this is so important?
Yes, absolutely. So the advanced manufacturing technologies can really benefit drug developers as it allows them more engagement with the regulatory agency and fast-track approval for drugs manufactured using advanced manufacturing technologies. So I think this will be, it's great to see this final guidance to be issued.
Alexis, I know you work with producers of new medicines. Do you have any perspective on that you can add here?
Yes, so I think one of the things that's very exciting at the moment is that the EU has had drastic change to their medicines legislation. This is coming through, it's at a late stage, so we should see the completion of it in the near future, so watch this space. Similarly, in the UK, we've had a number of changes to the medicines legislation, and most recently, new legislative framework for decentralized manufacture. So as we're seeing these changes coming through with legislation, and it also applies to guidance changes, it's important to think about the potential implications. So we need to understand what might those changes mean with respect to product development and registration. Are there any new requirements or changes in requirements for things like starting materials, raw materials, excipients, other ancillary materials? And the type of details that we must provide or might be requested by regulatory agencies. Also, with respect to process performance and product characterization, what should be known and at what stage of development, and what do we need to submit? So there's also the consideration for divergence. So there may be different requirements in different regions or different countries. Or what is the strategy to incorporate these? So that's where my head is at this point in time.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. And now I'm going to look to Mike. Mike, we've read that ICH has new guidelines on viral safety, specifically ICH Q5A-R2. What does this mean exactly for the industry?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That new guidance has been released, and I think the industry's been waiting for it for a while. And I was certainly excited to see it myself. Amongst other things, this revision has expanded the scope of products that require viral clearance and viral inactivation. Now, that includes certain recombinant viral vectors used for gene therapies and vaccines. For example, adeno-associated viral vectors, or AAV. Additionally, they've updated it with detailed guidance on use of NGS and applications of NGS for broad-based viral detection, and updated the guidance on use of specific PCR and qPCR assays for specific virus testing. And this is only part of the the changes, but I think these are some key ones to point out today.
Good, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And now I want to hit this next question, and it's going to be about evolving and newer modalities such as bispecific monoclonal antibodies and antibody drug conjugates, ADCs. Mike, what type of guidelines should we anticipate? And are there specific changes of significance that you can offer?
What I see as the most significant challenge of these emerging antibody drug conjugates and bispecific antibodies, that additional analytical testing will likely be required both to identify critical quality attributes in these molecules and ensure they meet the specifications for those CQAs in routine manufacturing. And this may require novel analytical methods that have not been needed for typical mAb manufacturing. So the industry's got to be on the lookout for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. I'm going to throw it back to you, Alexis. I know you wanted to mention some expedited programs. Can you spell out what those would mean?
Absolutely. So there's a number of regulatory agencies that have what are called expedited programs. So for example, in the US, we have breakthrough therapy designation, fast track designation, and for advanced therapies, there is regenerative medicine advanced therapy designation. In the EU, we have PRIME or priority medicines. The UK, for example, innovative licensing and access pathway, and for Japan, Sakigake. So these are all examples of programs which the developer can get additional support from the regulatory agencies to help them through development and into registration, to try to reduce the delays that are possible and to get patient access to the medicines in the most efficient way possible. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thanks to you all for all of that information. Let's switch it up a little bit right now. Let's talk about the financial side a little. There's always the need for companies to balance cost efficiency on their own side without compromising on quality. Zhao, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, we'll understand that FDA does not consider cost when reviewing regulatory filings. However, from the supplier side, we certainly recognize the financial challenge of implementing CGMP early on in the product development. I think ultimately this is a trade-off that the drug developer has to think about. I think if you anticipate accelerated clinical development pathway, such as fast track designation or accelerated approval, it makes sense to adopt well-characterized raw materials manufactured with established quality system early on and fully qualify them for your intended use. I think this approach will help you to streamline later phase CMC requirements and reducing potential delays. This is because if you use research-grade material in the early development phase, it can really lead to the product variability or even quality issues. And these issues can become significant obstacles when transition to later phases. By using well-characterized material from the beginning, drug developers reduce the risk of facing such challenges, which can be time-consuming and costly to resolve. Another point is, as a drug moves from early development to later clinical phases or commercial phases, usually the manufacturing process needs to be scaled up. The well-characterized materials intended for further manufacturing are typically produced with scalability in mind, which will ensure the transition to larger batches smoother and more predictable. This will be particularly important for accelerated pathways where the time to market is critical.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Would you like to chime in, Mike or Alexis?
Yes, I'd like to add on to that. And I have to say, of course, price should always be a consideration in developing a GMP compliant manufacturing process, but it should only be one of the considerations. My guidance is to select the best and most appropriate raw materials and other components of your process to ensure high quality, consistent product. And select the most appropriate components early, as the cost of making a change later in development can easily outweigh what was initially perceived as a cost advantage early in development.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And with that caveat that I'm not a quality assurance expert, there are several useful sources of guidance on raw material qualification. So, for example, the United States Pharmacopoeia Chapter 1043. It relates to cell, gene, and tissue engineered products, but I feel that the principles are applicable to other products. So, for materials qualification, it mentions identification and sourcing, so listing the source and in the intended use for all materials used for manufacture. Thinking about the criteria for selection and for suitability for use, characterizing the material, qualifying the vendor, and then monitoring performed by quality control and quality assurance. So, Heather, you again.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for all of your insight. And I think now's a good time to maybe pivot a little bit. Let's change the topic and talk about general best practices, I think. I imagine there has to be a lot of synergy between suppliers and end users. Xiao, how can processes be implemented to enhance support between suppliers and end users? What do you think?
Yeah. So the basic documentation that usually the supplier can provide on raw materials used for biopharmaceutical manufacturing will include the certificate of analysis, certificate of origin, safety data sheet, TSE, BSE declarations, and if applicable, suppliers may also be able to provide TSE, certificate of suitability, herd health certificate, and irradiation certificates. Those basic documentations can typically address many of the early phase CMC requirements for raw materials. And some suppliers may also be able to offer letter of authorization to master files in certain regions. And those can really help to create efficiencies for end users during their R&D applications. And in regions without master files, suppliers can offer access to regulatory support files under CDAs to assist with CMC or safety-related evaluation of raw materials.
Thanks, Xiao. If I can just jump in here. So my experience with advanced therapies is that proprietary materials can cause issues when developing new medicines for the EU, for example. So this is especially the case in late-stage development and for the marketing authorization application. Personally, I would advise developers to start discussing the potential provision of detailed information for raw materials early in development, and ideally before the first clinical study. There are some raw materials, for example, human serum, that can be very challenging due to differences in the regulation of blood-derived products in different countries. So, Mike, do you have comments in this area?
Yeah, I agree. It's so important to carefully select the most appropriate products for your process and product early as possible. I always tell customers to think in the long term, plan for success, plan for a positive outcome in your clinical program, and that you're going to launch this drug. And selection of your raw materials used in the manufacturing process is critical to that. So other important points as well. Reviewing and aligning customer and product requirements with supplier specifications. So communication with your suppliers is critical. Site audits, that's something you're going to need to consider, how to effectively execute. Those certainly confirm your supplier capabilities of supporting those audits, because undoubtedly that will be required at some point. And thinking longer term, the importance of developing a strong forecasting partnership and proactive management of the supply chain of critical reagents and even non-critical reagents, so you're never caught in a bind due to a product shortage.
Very good. Thank you very much for all of your input. Now, can one of you share a particular example of successful work between suppliers and end users that minimize raw material regulatory risks?
Yeah, I can share an example. So a supplier of cell culture media, which is used in several FDA-approved products, needed to increase their manufacturing capacity by expanding to a sister facility in Europe. While both sites operated under a harmonized quality management system, there were some concerns regarding the comparability of media produced at the new facility. Because the media formulation is proprietary, there is an existing type 2 master files established with FDA. This existing master file allowed the supplier to submit the comparability plan as a quality amendment requesting FDA's feedback. The comparability plan is aligned with ICH Q5E, which emphasized analytical comparability approach for the manufacturing transfer. It includes detailed information on the target material profile, critical material attributes, and also potential risk to product quality, as outlined in ICH Q9 Quality Risk Management. The FDA responded promptly to the quality amendment, enabling the transfer of product manufacturing to proceed and enhance the supplier resilience for the commercial product in Europe. This comparability plan also can serve as a template for future cell culture media transfers, establishing a regulatory accepted strategy for supplier and for pharmaceutical customers. The documentation package provided to the end users contain a summary of the comparability results, an overview of the harmonized quality management system, and a statement confirming the change has been discussed with FDA, and the master file is updated to include the new manufacturing sites. I think this is a great example highlighting how the collaboration between suppliers, end users, and regulatory authorities can facilitate a smooth change and underscore the importance of using well-characterized raw materials and having a supplier that can understand end users' expectation for comparability data. Back to you, Heather.
Okay, thank you so much. And following up on that, effective change management is essential to ensure quality and compliance. Mike, what are some critical components of that strategy?
Yeah, and first off, CMC change is a complex and highly regulated process. There's plenty of regulatory guidance documents available to guide you through the process. But considering making a change, especially post-commercialization, that's even more complex. I'm going to keep my answer brief, I guess. I think the PDA Technical Report 91, Post-Approval Change Management and Implementation for Biologics and Pharmaceutical Drug Products, a user's guide, that really provides a great framework. That's an excellent place to start. So that's my guidance on that.
Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to talk about the topic of avoiding changes to critical raw materials in the late stages of drug development. This can be time-consuming and costly, correct? But sometimes it is unavoidable. What are some tips and best practices? Can all of you give some input?
Yeah, so as a general comment, I would say that it's highly advisable to understand the critical material attributes for a critical raw material, and whether those critical material attributes are adequately controlled for each raw material batch, i.e. to have confidence that the variability in critical material attributes between batches is minimal. If, for example, a supplier plans to make a change to a material, or if it's necessary to change supplier, then if critical material attributes are impacted, that could impact the drug product critical quality attributes. Ideally, the manufacturing process will be designed to be as robust as possible with respect to material variability. But there will always be a risk of CQA impact due to a change in a critical raw material. Worst case, this could be drug product batches pre and post change that are not comparable. So Xiao and Mike, can you give a bit more insight?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the importance of understanding the critical material attributes. I just want to add that it's also important to work with suppliers who have a strong understanding of raw material post-approval change classification. That can be really beneficial, as the suppliers will be able to provide a change notification with sufficient supporting data to help you evaluate the change and facilitate the regulatory filing amendments. And also during commercial phase, the best practice will be enrolling in pre-notification programs with suppliers to proactively manage raw material changes.
Any thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, and where I could add to that, and just to reinforce what Xiao said, is if you're planning a change, get in touch with your critical suppliers early, and make sure they have all the capabilities to support that change. And this can include, potentially filing new DMFs or preparing new regulatory support files. So, you have all the documentation required. You don't have to wait on your supplier.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We've covered a lot today. I'd like to know how can regulatory professionals and end users stay updated on these regulatory changes and industry best practices? What specific information resources do you all recommend?
So I would say that there's a number of resources that are highly valuable. So regulatory agencies often have things like newsletters. There's also newsletters regarding pharmacopoeias that you can sign up for, or various industry groups. Mike?
I think additionally, participation in industry groups for standards generation, for example, ISO or ARM, participation in bioforum. The Parenteral Drug Association is a great organization that helps lead and guide a change and improvement in the industry. So participating in all of those is a great way to keep current.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I think also for me, collaborate with customers on the design of new tools or technologies can also be very beneficial to just get the voice of customer feedback and also to understand the best industry practices.
Very good. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Finally, reviewing publicly available regulatory decision-making documentation, such as FDA, BLA approvals, can be informative as well. I mean, there's a lot of material in there that's is confidential, but what's publicly available can be very helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you, all three of you, for giving such important and valuable information to our audience. And we are now going to take a little pause, and we're going to go ahead and move to our Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have not submitted a question yet and you would like to, there's still time. You can go ahead and submit that through the Q&A box on your screen. Now we're going to move on to our first audience question. And this question is asking about risk management and contingency planning. How can Thermo Fisher help provide a customer with information needed for a material change risk assessment? Can you help with that, Zhao?
Yeah, absolutely. So we will send change notifications to customer in advance of implementing the change to allow customers sufficient time to evaluate the potential risk. We can also provide supporting documentations to help with the risk assessment. For example, if we're going to have a change to the product contacting film used in the bioprocessing containers, we can provide data packages detailing the change, such as the material of construct of the film certificate of analysis, and a summary of the film validation data. We can also provide comparability data of cell culture media packaged with the old versus the new film, and we can also offer samples for customers to test. However, we will not be able to help customers to perform the risk assessment because we do not know their product and the manufacturing details. Back to you, Heather.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Our next question is asking, how do you manage CMC questions for critical raw materials in regions without master files? Zhao, what do you think? Back to you again.
Yeah, so our approach really varies by region. For example, in the EU, the qualitative media formulation must be shared with the sponsor as part of the regulatory process. In other regions, it may be acceptable to provide information directly to the regulatory authority. And in some cases, addressing those inquiries may involve intellectual property disclosure process. Our regulatory team is continuously evaluating available pathways to support drug developers to meet their CMC filing requirements. And we're always open for collaboration with customers to better understand the regions in which they tend to file, and also to develop a tailored support plans to ensure we can effectively respond to any request for information from the regulatory agencies.
And if I can just jump in here, the changes to the EU medicines legislation should include the provision for what are termed additional quality master files. That may mean that the addition of a mechanism is included by which proprietary details for raw materials could be provided directly to EU regulatory agencies. On the one hand, I see this as potentially positive. However, from my perspective, I believe that it is important to understand the potential residual impurities in drug product batches and whether worst-case quantities administered could be of concern regarding patient safety. Therefore, I would encourage all developers to establish and maintain good professional relationships with suppliers of critical raw materials and to obtain sufficient details to perform safety assessments for residual impurities. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you both so much for those answers and that information. We appreciate it. And I'm going to head back to the audience question. And this one is asking, how do you ensure your regulatory support aligns with global requirements? Who can help with this one?
Yeah, I can take this one. So at Thermo Fisher, we incorporate all the major raw material guidelines and also actively contribute to global standard development initiatives, such as the Standard Coordinating Body and Bioforum, to ensure compliance with raw material quality standards. And when applicable, we'll also use formal regulatory pathways, such as the drug master files and the certificate of suitability. And in cases where those are not available, we can provide regulatory support files or engage in the direct disclosure with regulatory agencies as needed.
Very good. Thank you so much. Well, as we come to the end of our webinar, I want to thank our speakers for sharing their invaluable insights. We hope you found the discussion on best practices, collaboration strategies, and future market trends both informative and beneficial. Before we close, can anyone quickly recap 3 key takeaways? Who'd like to start?
I'll start. My advice is to engage with your supplier as early in your development process as possible.
I would say that it's very important to understand the materials you're using, understand the critical quality attributes, and therefore the quality required.
And I'll just say choose a knowledgeable supplier.
All great key takeaways. Thank you, all 3 of you, so much. Thank you so much for joining us today in the audience. If we did not get to your question, no worries. They will be forwarded on to our presenters, and they'll reach out to you post-event. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone participating, and we hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Take care.